Okay, so today we are taking a pictographic approach to learning the order of the carpal bones. Now, all we're getting out of this is the order and some of the relationships, but at the end of the day, you will have to apply all of this to the way that the carpals look in the actual wrist and be able to identify the carpals from the actual wrist. But this is a nice starting point. What we're going to start with is a sort of grid. It's going to be 2 rows and 4 columns because there are a grand total of 8 carpal bones, and they do exist more or less in 2 columns, and I'm making mine pretty large just so we have lots of space to work around. Undo that line because it's too far over. There we go. So now we have these 8 spaces, and this is going to be the proximal row, and this is going to be the distal row. And then the weird part is that we're going to go from lateral, this is where your thumb is, to medial. And that's a little bit of a strange orientation. It's just what works for me. It would be kind of look like you're looking at the back of your right hand. So you're pronated through your wrist. So we have our convenient mnemonic device. Some lovers try positions that they can't handle. And that gets us so far, but there are a lot of T's involved, and all of these carpal bones have some kind of linguistic root to them, or they have a certain shape that has a certain meaning that is reflected in the name. So we are going to sort of go with that. So we'll start with the scaphoid, and the scaphoid is the anatomical snuff box, as I discussed in my lecture. And that is the superficial anatomy, the palpative anatomy. For that region, it is the snuff box. I did not come up with that term. I do not utilize snuff, and I don't even really know what a snuff box looks like. But if I had to imagine what a snuff box looked like, I would make just a little box with a lid that you could close for whatever that snuff may be. So the scaphoid is the anatomical snuff box. The next thing is the lunate, and luna is the moon, and the lunate bone from a certain angle really does look like a crescent moon, so you don't really have to spend a lot of time on that one. And then you get the first place where I think we get to clarify how these T's are arranged, and I always associate the triquetrum or triquetrum, depending on who you ask, with the pisiform. Now the pisiform's only actually visible from the anterior view. It looks like a little pea shape, and that's it. Like, that's the whole bone looks like that from most angles. It does have one articular facet because it does articulate with the triquetrum, and the triquetrum is like a kind of pyramid shape. And again, the real bone probably looks a little bit more like that in comparison to a real pyramid, but this idea of all of these sides are being sort of a facet for something else, and that happens to be true for that pisiform. So the sort of real world relationship between the pisiform and the triquetrum, if you wanted to make it sort of a simplified geometry, would be about like that. I'm going to go ahead and get that off the table, but I sort of visualize it as the pyramids, and there's the moon in the background. Just draw a little cloud or two in there to be like this is a nature scene. And by connecting those 2 pictographs, that does mean that you can kind of understand the location of the triquetrum to the pisiform and relate them to each other. Meanwhile, the trapezium is next. So the trapezium creates a saddle joint with the thumb. This is the thumb side. This is the trapezium, and I draw a little trapeze to sort of reflect that we're on a trapeze here. So kind of, I like to swing my thumb back and forth to remind myself that it's on a little trapeze. That is with an M right there. That's pretty important because there's a trapezius muscle in the upper back, and it's very easy to mix those things up. Next up, we have the trapezoid. In a lot of ways, this is a process of elimination. We've got the triquetrum here, we've got the trapezium here, so we have devices for those. The trapezoid is just middle school geometry trapezoid, and again, the real bone from a certain angle is trapezoidal in orientation and shape, so that works out. we know the prefix capit, right? So capitate refers to the head. Capit refers to a head, and there is a certain angle. Here's a sort of real life what the capitate looks like from a certain angle. And then let's go ahead and draw this as the head and neck of a person, kind of like a stick figure. Capitate. Right? So in the real world, capitate is associated with the third digit. So we do have this really central position of the capitate. It's a very large carpal bone with many others associated around it that lunate. It's almost like a hat in the real world. So like imagine he's wearing this crescent moon about like that, to give you an understanding of where that head is oriented. But again, it's a head like a lot of other bones have heads, right? The head of the humerus, the head of the femur, kind of going into a concave circuit and creating a lot of movement around that articulation. And then finally we have hamate. And hamate has a bony process known as the hamulus. And so I like to draw a little ham bone to remember the hamate and the hamulus. Now I'm not holding you to hamulus at the undergrad level. It's very cartoony, right? There's no real bone that looks like that. But there's our little ham. Let's make it red just for fun. The only color on here. Sure, why not? So yeah, that is my pictographic relationship. Just again, one more time, you do have to be able to apply that to what these bones look like in the real world. So over here, this large one is the scaphoid lunate triquetrum, and now you'll see you can't really see the pisiform unless you're on the anterior view. So this is palm facing you, and there's the pisiform here. You can only see just a little edge of the pisiform right here. So from the posterior view, it looks like that first row only has 3. We go back over to the thumb side, we see the trapezium with a UM, we see the trapezoid here, we see the capitate, and we see the hamate, the hamulus of the hamate here sticking out. There you go. So I hope that that helped. You may gel with you, it may not. It's totally up to you if you utilize this technique. Anything to anchor it down, right? Anything to start to understand these positions in relationship to each other. I hope this helps. Thank you for your time.